Alright, so this is level 7, the library.
We must collect the index before we can activate the installation.
This is by far the most unpopular level with fans of this game. What you're seeing right now behind those infection forms are larger carrier forms, and when they're shot at enough, they explode and more infection forms burst out of them. They also like to walk up to the player before exploding as well. That can be kind of dangerous. Practically a walking grenade that spawns in more enemies.
We are near the index chamber. Follow me.
The voice of 343 Guilty Spark, that is Tim Dabado. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He had originally recorded his lines accidentally calling his own character 342 Guilty Spark, but Joseph Staten had intentionally named the character with the number 343, and he had Marty O'Donnell digitally alter any lines where Dabado messed up. So if you listen back to that closing cutscene from the last level, you can kind of hear the second 3 in his name as he introduces himself. That's just the very first 3 that he said for his name.
The energy field above us contains the index. We must get up there. The security doors have sealed automatically.
Marathon 2 was originally supposed to have an enemy that could resurrect other dead enemies as zombies, but it was cut from that game, and the idea was brought back for this one.
You brought such ineffective weapons to combat the flood, despite the containment protocols. The flood must not escape. See how the bodies can transform.
And a lot of this level is really just kind of a gauntlet in fighting a ton of flood forms and getting to the sacred icon for the Halo ring. which, as the monitor has told Chief,
We must continue.
can be used to eliminate the flood entirely.
Perhaps we'll have time to see.
You can see there, once that carrier form got close enough to me, he went ahead and planted himself on the ground and blew himself up.
Scans as a class 2.
Pardon me. A plasma conduit in section 5524 has disrupted power flow to a gravitic plane.
I am a genius.
At one point, every level the Flood were in actually had a flamethrower for players to access. The flamethrower still exists in the files of the Xbox version of the game, but I don't think it works properly.
When I've completed my task.
The PC version of Combat Evolved, the flamethrower would be included in the multiplayer mode. And 13 years later, when the Master Chief Collection came out, the flamethrower would be in the multiplayer mode for Combat Evolved there as well. On top of all that, unique death animations had actually been created for things that were killed by the flamethrower. They kind of like run around on fire before going down. It also wouldn't have had an overheating mechanic. That was added in when that flamethrower was added to the PC version of the game. From what I understand, I think that weapon had to be completely rebuilt.
I am a genius.
A lot of fans like to call the infection forms popcorn because of their design. And also just the way they kind of satisfyingly pop whenever they die. think the dynamic that the Flood offer from a combat standpoint is just really interesting, because the Covenant sort of all worked with their strengths together, but you could always sort of rely on them to do that. The grunts always attack in swarms, and had a very close call there with that carrier exploding right next to me. You know, the Jackals are more conservative. The elites sort of strategize. The Floods sort of all act and attack independently on their own, which makes them each very dynamic, just as units. I think it makes them a little more difficult to deal with as a result. To be honest with you, I'm really not sure why I spent so much time trying to finish those ones off.
I would conjecture that the other species currently on the installation is responsible for releasing the Flood. They seem most persistent in their attempts to access restricted areas.
Fan reception for 343 Guilty Spark, the character, was fairly lukewarm, to say the least. Probably due to this level. He spends a lot of time telling you to wait in locations where you're sort of fighting for your life. There are enemies there, but there are still sections up ahead where I'll have to wait for the monitor to let me progress anyways, so figured I might as well ignore those enemies for now and just keep on going.
Of course, samples were kept here after the last catastrophic outbreak. Was that?
I believe somewhere up ahead soon, I encounter some combat forms wielding rocket launchers. I think too, you probably already saw me fight one or two on the previous floor. But whenever a combat form has a rocket launcher in his hand, he's very dangerous because They don't really read whether or not there's anything in front of them. They just sort of look for the player and fire. So even if it's going to get them killed, they will still shoot. I thought there was one up ahead here. I guess I was wrong.
The installation was specifically built to study and contain the flood. Their survival as a race was dependent upon it. I am grateful to see that some of them survived to reproduce. I will deactivate the security lock. Wait here.
And in this room there is an option to just sort of hide in one of the corners. You don't really have to fight any of these guys. You just sort of wait them out until the monitor gets back and opens the door. But I didn't think that would be very fun to watch, so...
Please stay close. Time is short.
very interesting thing about the Flood is when you fight some of the combat forms, and you may have already noticed this a couple times before, but even when some of them are downed, they have a chance to get back up and keep fighting you. A lot of people really didn't like this level because of two main reasons. The first one being the whole environment is fairly repetitive, which it is. You can tell there's a lot of the same hallways sort of copy and pasted. It seems pretty clear that the time constraint was really hitting Bungie around this area. The other reason being, on Legendary, this is one of the harder levels. A lot of players felt that the difficulty spike was more intense than on the other levels.
The energy barrier surrounding the index
Will deactivate when we reach the ground floor.
You may now retrieve the index. Protocol requires that I take possession of the index for transport. Your organic form renders you vulnerable to infection. The index must not fall into the hands of the Flood before we reach the control room and activate the installation. The Flood is spreading. We must hurry.